Hello, my name is Melissa Holden, and I've been making videos mostly for my children, but because I was reading a story to my daughter this morning, and as I was reading it to her, the thought came to me, if you were a good mother, you would be reading them things that they need to hear. And so that's why I'm going to make a video for them to hear of the testimonies of the Book of Mormon, so they know what they are. And this one that I'm going to read is the testimony of the prophet Joseph Smith himself. And this is very long, and I probably won't be able to do it all. Interesting story. I'll just share with you. As I started reading this, and I pause when there's these lines that are just stars. It kind of means end of that record, start of another one. But you read it all straight through. And I was just pausing at those. Those were good times to pause. And I looked up to pause after I'd been reading it, and it shut off. I don't know if it was too long or what. It's a very interesting read. Hopefully my reading this to you will make you want to read it yourself. See if I made this up or not. Because it's a pretty fantastic story. Here it is. The testimony of the prophet Joseph Smith. The prophet Joseph Smith's own words concerning... No, it doesn't say that. The prophet Joseph Smith's own words about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon are, on the evening of the 21st of September, 1823, I betook myself to prayer and supplication to Almighty God. While I was thus in the act of calling upon God, I discovered a light appearing in my room. And it continued to increase until the room was lighter than at noonday, when immediately a personage appeared at my bedside, standing in the air, for his feet didn't touch the floor. He had on a loose robe of exquisite whiteness. It was the whiteness beyond anything earthly. They can't even do it in the movies. It doesn't say that part. I interjected it. I had ever seen, nor do I believe that any earthly thing could ever be made to appear so exceedingly white and brilliant. His hands were naked, and his arms also a little above the wrists. So also were his feet naked, and as were his legs a little above the ankles. His head and neck were also bare. I could discover that he had on no other clothing but this robe, as it was open, so I could see into his bosom. Not only was his robe exceedingly white, but his whole person was glorious beyond description, and his countenance truly like lightning. The room was exceeding... My son and I were just talking about how you shouldn't look at Welder's thing because it's like lightning, and you shouldn't look at it because it'll burn your eyes. But he could look on this. It's like lightning. The room was exceedingly light, but not so very bright as immediately around his person. When I first looked upon him, I was afraid. But the fear soon left me. He called me by name, and he said unto me that he was a messenger sent forth from the presence of God, that his name was Moroni, and that God had a work for me to do, and that my name should be had for good and evil among all nations, kindreds, and tongues, or that it should be both good and evil spoken of among all people. He said there was a book deposited, written upon gold plates, giving an account of the former inhabitants of this continent, and the source from whence they sprang. He also said that the fullness of the everlasting gospel was contained in it, and delivered by the Savior to the ancient inhabitants. Also, that there were 2 stones and silver bows, and these stones were fastened to a breastplate, and they constituted what is called the Urim and the Thummim. There's no the Urim and Thummim. Deposited with the plates, the possession of and use of these stones were what constituted seers in ancient or former times, and that God had prepared for them for the purpose of translating the book. Again, he told me that when I got the plates of which he had spoken, for the time that they should be attained was not yet fulfilled, I should not show them in any of their person, neither the breastplate with the urim and thummim, only unto those whom I should be commanded to show them. If I did, I should be destroyed. While he was conversing with me about the plates, the vision opened up to my mind, and I could see the place where the plates were deposited. I saw it so clearly and distinctly that I knew the place again when I visited it. After this communication, I saw the light in the room begin to gather immediately around the person of him who had been speaking it to me, and it continued to do so until the room was again left dark, except for just around him, when instantly I saw, as it were, a conduit opened up right into heaven, and he ascended until he entirely disappeared, and the room was left as it had been before this heavenly light made its appearance. I lay musing on the singularity of the scene and marveling greatly at what had been told to me by this extraordinary messenger, when in the midst of my meditation I suddenly discovered that my room was again getting lighted, and in an instant, as it were, the same heavenly messenger was again by my bedside. He commenced and again related the very same things which he had done the first, without the least variation, which having done, he informed me that the great judgments were coming upon the earth, with great desolations by famine, sword, and pestilence, and these were grievous judgments, and they'd come on the earth in this generation. Having related these things, he again ascended as he had done before. By this time, so deep were the impressions made on my mind that sleep had fled from my eyes, and I lay overwhelmed in astonishment of what I both seen and heard. But what was to my surprise was again I beheld the same messenger at my bedside, and I heard him rehearse or repeat over again to me the same things as before, and he added a caution to me, telling me that Satan would try to tempt me in consequence to the indigent circumstance of my father's family, to get the plates for the purpose of getting rich. This he forbade me, saying that I must have no other object in getting view in getting these plates but to glorify God, and I must not must not be influenced by any other motive than the building of his kingdom, otherwise I couldn't get them. After this third visit, he again ascended into heaven as before, and I was again left to ponder on the strangeness of what I had just experienced, when almost immediately as the heavenly messenger had ascended from me the third time, that the cock crowed. I found the day was approaching, so that our interviews must have occupied the whole night. I shortly arose from my bed, and as usual went to the necessary labors of the day. But in attempting to work as at other times, I found my strength was exhausted, as to render me entirely unable. My father, who was laboring along with me, discovered something to be wrong with me, and he told me to go home. I started with the intention of going to the house, but in attempting to cross the fence out of the field where we were, my strength entirely failed me, and I fell helpless to the ground, and for a time was quite unconscious of anything. The first thing that I can recollect was of a voice speaking unto me, calling me by name. I looked up, and I beheld the same messenger standing over my head, surrounded by light as before. He then again related unto me all that he had related to me the previous night, and he commanded me to go to my father and to tell him of the vision and commandments which I had received. I obeyed. I returned to my father in the field and rehearsed the whole matter unto him. He replied to me that it was of God, and he told me to go and do as I was commanded by the messenger. I left the field and went to the place where the messenger had told me the plates were deposited. Knowing to the distinctness of the vision which I had concerning it, I knew the place the instant that I arrived there. Convenient to the village of Manchester, Ontario, New York, stands a hill of considerable size. Okay, I'll say something. I was looking up, for some reason or other, Ontario County records, and Ontario County doesn't exist now, or maybe I don't know, I can't remember what the different counties were, but I was trying to find records for Ontario County, and it was, basically there were no records, and the reason being is because in the newness of the state of New York, the counties would shift where they say the line was, and in doing that, they did away with that county, and it's part of another county now. Okay, anyway, they were in New York. There's a considerable slide. And on the west side of the hill, not far from the top, under a stone of considerable size, lay the plates deposited in a stone box. The stone was thick and rounding in the middle on the upper side, and thin towards the edges, so that the middle part of it was visible of the ground, but the edge was all covered in the ground with earth. Having removed the earth, I obtained a lever which I had got fixed under the edge of the stone. With a little exertion, I raised it up. I looked in. I think I'll stop there. If you want to know more, you should read it. It's a good story.